All right, I guess we'll get started. So a very good morning if you're joining us stateside. If you're in Europe or Asia, good afternoon and good evening. And thank you so much for joining us. This is your Telerik webinar on modern .NET apps, or what's new in .NET. There is a lot of things changing, so we just wanted to have an honest developer conversation. So before we get started, who are we? Hopefully familiar faces by now. We have me, Sam Basu, Michael Crump, and Ed Charbonneau. All three of us are developer advocates with Telerik, and Michael and me might be doing most of the speaking today for the next hour. Ed is going to be furiously typing in the background trying to answer as many of your questions as he can. And then at the very end, all three of us are going to be coming on air to answer again more of your questions. The Twitter handles that you see for each of us, that's the easiest way to get hold of us and maybe keep the conversation going after we are done with the webinar. All right, so moving on, why are we talking about the new .NET? What's in this for you? Essentially, a lot of things are changing in the Microsoft developer stack, and we just wanted to maybe give you a high-level overview of everything that's going on and what you need to know going into the new .NET and the new Windows 10 world, the new web and the mobile, what's new across the platform. So just very high-level tips on what you need to know across web, desktop, and mobile. That's our goal. So let's break down what we're going to cover. So I'm going to start off things first. I will talk a little bit about the evolution of .NET, where we are at and where we are going to be in the future. Then I will talk about ASP.NET 5 a little bit, which is the VNext of our ASP.NET. And then I will hand it over to Michael, and then once I come back on at the very end, I will talk a little bit about the data and cloud services. So that's me, and then when Michael takes over, he will talk about a lot of the core features, like what's new in C# 6.0, what's new in VS 2015, and then all of the mobile stuff. How can you build mobile applications with Visual Studio? What's the Xamarin story? How can you go native? What are some of your options? So Michael has a lot of things to cover. One thing we will say is we will show some code on the screen, so keep that window where you're seeing the screencast, keep that maximized if you can, so that'll give you the best possible view. All right, so what you expect from Telerik webinars, some really cool prizes, right? So here's what we have for you today. You get a Microsoft Surface 3. This is the newest Surface edition, and you get that for the best possible question, right? And then you get a Microsoft band, which is still actually hard to find. So you get that for the second best question, and these are things we'll just pick after the end of the webinar. So the bottom line is fire away. Fire away as many questions as you can, and Ed and all three of us will try to answer them at the end of the webinar. And Ed is going to keep doing that all throughout. All right, so with that, let me get started. So the reason we are having this conversation is there is a lot of change in the air. You may have heard things about .NET going open sourced, what's happening with ASP.NET, what's the cross-platform story, are you going to have to change the way you use .NET, and so on. So let's just talk about all of these changes so we can embrace the future a little more comfortably. So before we go to the future, let's maybe talk a little bit about the present and what we have been through. Microsoft's .NET as a framework started back in 2002. This was .NET 1, and then .NET 2.0 is where things got serious. And then you can see why this is getting more and more important to Microsoft. They're trying to install .NET as a part of the OS itself. So we've gone from .NET 2, 3, to all the way to .NET 4.5, which is the present production version of .NET. And it's been a seamless story over the last 10 or 15 years, and we have built more and more abstractions and niceties for developers to build applications with .NET. So what's the future like? If .NET 4.5 is your present, next future is .NET Framework 4.6. Now, in terms of the applications and all of the technologies that you use to build .NET applications, nothing is changing in terms of .NET Framework 4.6. All of your web stacks, your WPF, your desktop stuff, or your WinForms, everything runs on the entire .NET framework just the way it is doing today. So this is the next logical version of your .NET framework on servers and on machines or tablets and so on. Now, in parallel to that, there is a new guy in the block, and that's .NET Core 5. This one is being written from ground up, and it's got some very interesting pieces. This is the first time where you see the .NET Core actually going cross-platform. So you will be able to run some .NET applications cross-platform on Apple, on Mac OS X and Linux, as well as Windows, which is very, very cool. And we have additions to it like the .NET native runtime, which is compiling your C# code down directly to machine code. It's just a little bit more faster. So some of the newer technologies like ASP.NET 5 for sure, and then the newer Universal Windows platform, they will use the .NET Core framework going forward. But keep in mind, this is just a fork in the road. If you have your WebForms, your WPF, your WinForms, your ASP.NET 4 and 5 applications, those can continue running on .NET Framework 4.6, just the way they are doing today. And along with it, you have all of the all of the shared pieces, like all the support pieces that run the .NET Framework at the very bottom, and those remain the way they are. So moving forward, you might have questions about what's open source, which parts of these are open source. Well, not the whole thing, and you can get to most of these pieces open source, but in terms of taking in community contributions, they are limited to the ones that are highlighted in yellow. .NET Framework 4.6, you can get to the source code, but they cannot accept, I guess, community polls because you might break a lot of things. This is the whole .NET Framework, and a lot of applications run on it. So definitely .NET Core 5 is beginning out entirely open source. You can get to all of the source code on GitHub, and ASP.NET 4 and 5 are obviously open source, as well as some of the supporting pieces like the Roslyn compiler platform. Some of the NuGet pieces are open source. So moving on to what the future lies. So we all know that Windows 10 is around the corner. I think July 29th is the date when it comes out. And it is a big deal because this is the first time we are seeing the actual one Windows platform in action. This is the same Windows for any of your device form factors, from your phones to tablets to desktops. And you have the same universal app platform powering everything from IoT to Xbox. And moving forward, you'll see Microsoft being a lot more open source friendly, a lot of stuff on GitHub. There are also heavy investments in IoT, which is the Internet of Things. And then obviously very cool things like HoloLens. So the future for .NET developers is very, very bright, and it's just opening up the spectrum of the kind of applications that you can build for web, desktop, and mobile. All right, so moving on, before we get into the actual core stuff, just a quick slide. We'll try to keep the Telerik stuff kind of minimum. We'll just try to give you a generic overview of things, but keep in mind, Telerik DevCraft is our suite for all things .NET. And it's actually stepping a little outside of .NET as well. So no matter what type of application you're building, web, mobile, or desktop, I think you'll find that there are DevCraft products in this suite which really, really help you out, starting from native controls for Windows to iOS and Android, as well as a lot of the productivity, debugging, and reporting features. So lots of you may be already customers of Telerik DevCraft, but again, take a look at all of these product offerings from us. All right, so let me jump into ASP.NET. Let's start talking about ASP.NET because this is the next big thing. There's a lot of buzz around it. So let's talk about what this all means. And let me have a quick drink of water. Okay, so ASP.NET 5 is the next version of ASP.NET. And if you have been hearing the term ASP.NET VNext, that's essentially ASP.NET 5. It is redesigned from ground up. It is now a much more lean .NET stack for modern web applications. It is cross-platform. It is optimized for on-premise or on cloud deployments. It is very, very modular, so you only get to choose and pick the pieces that you need, and it is entirely open source. So in a lot of ways, this is really a big change for ASP.NET, but again, no one's trying to move your cheese. You can still do the same things that you're doing today. Some changes in the ASP.NET runtime. You do have the access to run ASP.NET application on the full .NET CLR, which is your entire API stack, or now you can choose the core CLR, which is the lean modular component, and you get the NuGet pieces that you need. The runtime is deployed with the app, so the .NET framework is deployed with your application, and it's much more cloud optimized. The same core CLR is also cross-platform, so you can run it on Linux and OS X. You can keep in mind we are going to go through a lot of slides and a lot of information. Everything will be available, so don't worry about missing out on any information. So what I have here with the K tooling, this actually is slightly obsolete, and I'll tell you what this means. These are some command line tools. You don't need a lot of command line tools if you're in Visual Studio, but you definitely do command line tools when you're in Linux or Mac OS X. So KRE is a runtime engine which bootstraps and runs your ASP.NET applications. KVM is your version manager, since that lets you choose which version of the .NET framework goes with your application. KPM is the package manager, which lets you download all the dependencies for your application, and just some regular K tooling, which lets you run your application. Now, all of these things have slightly different names now. DNX is the new .NET executable runtime. This is what runs your .NET applications today, the ASP.NET applications. So anything I show you with K, replace them with DNU and DNX. So DNVM is the .NET version manager, and DNU is the .NET updater. But otherwise, their functions remain the same. So moving on, I will show you a couple of demos. But let me show you this piece here. Just trying to get a grip on all of the moving pieces, just so you know all of the things that make the ASP.NET platform now. If you head out to github.com/ASP.NET Home, that is the home for all things ASP.NET 5, and you can see them building on things every night. This is the open source world of ASP.NET. What's Node.js? Node.js is JavaScript on the server, really quick asynchronous I/O, and then the reason we need this is some of the supporting things. One fundamental thing is NPM, the Node Package Manager. We need this to get some of the bits, in particular the Yeoman generators for ASP.NET. Moving on, you may have heard of this thing called Homebrew, especially if you're on a Mac. This is where you get packages that Apple forgot to ship, like third-party DLLs and other packages that you want to install on your Mac. So we are going to use Homebrew to actually tap into the ASP.NET repos, so we can pull down the bits and actually run DNX on a Mac if we have to. So Yeoman is the next thing, and we need this because Visual Studio gives us a lot of comforts. We get templates, we get nice projects, but if we do not have Visual Studio, we need some scaffolding that will give us a nice project structure. So Yeoman does that for ASP.NET, and I'll show you that in just a second. Bower is a very, very popular package manager for the web. All of your JavaScript libraries and other dependencies can be brought down through Bower. We are also seeing heavy use of things like Grunt and Gulp, which are JavaScript-based task runners. So these do automation things like pre-compilation, pre-build steps, like compiling things into your actual www root folder so you can deploy your applications much more smoothly. So these things are automation pieces, and they are actually built into Visual Studio. Now, the thing that I wanted to maybe talk about next is OmniSharp. So it's one thing to say we can run our ASP.NET applications on a Mac, but is it feasible to write C# and ASP.NET outside of a Windows or a Visual Studio machine? The answer is yes, and that's because of cross-platform .NET development efforts like OmniSharp. What you can do is you can use any text editor, Sublime Text, Emacs, Atoms, brackets, and so on, and you can get Visual Studio like C# IntelliSense. So it's truly writing C# outside of Visual Studio, and that is a reality. As well as Visual Studio Code. This is Microsoft's thin and lightweight editor that is cross-platform and lets you write ASP.NET, Node.js applications beautifully, full IntelliSense debugging capabilities, and they're building on this every day. So it's really a good world to live in. So how would you run ASP.NET on a Mac? And this is where I do have to apologize. We were trying a whole lot of things. Screen sharing isn't working the best, so we actually have a lot of the demos as screenshots. So let me walk you through it. So the first thing I would do is bring up my terminal window, and I would say yo ASP.NET. So I'm using the Yeoman generator, which I've already installed through NPM. And notice how it gives me a nice template, and I can say web application, then I say give it the name. Let's say just webinar is the name of my web application. The next step is it just creates a whole bunch of things in my local drive. You'll notice that this is the this is the OS X terminal, and then it goes ahead and creates my project. The next thing is, if we take a look at the project here, this is the project that's been scaffolded by Yeoman. The project structure is exactly the same as what you'll get from Visual Studio, and that is by purpose. So you have nice interoperability between multiple platforms. Moving on, the next thing you might want to do is KPM restore. KPM is the package manager, and you can say restore, or nowadays you can say DNU restore. What this will do is pull down all of your NuGet dependencies for your ASP.NET application and put them all in your file system so you can run your application. And you'll notice that KPM does its thing. The next thing to do is Kestrel. If you look at the very bottom of the screen here, this is where you invoke a lightweight web server and you say, okay, go ahead and fire up my application. It has everything it's going to build and deploy. And then once you do that successfully, you can actually see, this is the next screenshot where I actually have ASP.NET running natively on a Mac, which is really, really cool. You notice this is a localhost 5004. So just the same way it runs on Windows, it runs on Mac, it runs on Linux, and it even runs on a Raspberry Pi if you wanted to, which is very nice. So how would you write this code? It's one thing to run it. Well, you have a few options. First is VS Code, which is again a full-featured ASP.NET 5 editor nowadays. You get full IntelliSense, as you can see from the screenshot. You get like parameter queries. You get GitHub integration. You get some debugging, which is also coming. So, and you get the Solution Explorer on the left-hand side. It's a really rich debugging and coding experience outside of Visual Studio. And this is the same VS Code that works on Windows and OS X and Linux. And the other option for you is Sublime Text, which is again just a thin, lightweight editor. You can also do Emacs and brackets and other things, but I mean, I like using these two. Again, you can see the Solution Explorer on the left-hand side. I have access to all of my project folders and files, and I can edit things. So I get C# like IntelliSense, Visual Studio like IntelliSense right here in Sublime Text or VS Code. Just everything that you imagine from Visual Studio is almost there. And you actually do not even have to leave your editor. You can fire up your builds and your DNX run commands right from inside VS Code and Sublime, because there are plugins and extensions that help you do that. So you can fire up your web application right from inside the editor and see how things are working out. So I am running a little late on time. I have to give it back to Michael. So let me do 2 more minutes. So does all of this mean that someone's moving your cheese? Because, yeah, no, not really. You can still do the same things that you do with ASP.NET MVC and WebForms and Web API. So along with ASP.NET 5 comes MVC 6, which is the new iteration of MVC. You get new things like the merger of the MVC and Web API suites. You get view components, which are like partial views. Tag helpers is really cool. Tag helpers is something that allows you to use like custom markup in your HTML without having to reuse the HTML helpers and mix up your C# and HTML. And then there's new things with the routing. Again, that's an article that we wrote. So take a look on developer.telerik.com to see all of the new features with MVC 6. In terms of WebForms 4.6, again, WebForms isn't dying. It will run just fine on .NET 4.6. In fact, it gets some really cool enhancements like HTTP2, which gives you lot more performance optimization through, I guess, much more compression, better compression, and parallel asynchronous links back to the server. You get an async model data binding, which is entity framework type async await calls, and you get Roslyn. So you can actually make changes to your C# code and not have to save. I mean, you would have to save, but then not have to build the whole thing and deploy. It is just on-the-fly compilation. So very cool things happen with WebForms as well. And if we look at what's new in ASP.NET in terms of VS 2015, you'll notice I just have a couple of screenshots here. This is VS 2015 RC. You will get the RTM bits later this month. You'll notice that in terms of web, you just get a single project template. Now it says ASP.NET Web Application. And once you go ahead and select that, this is also where you see the fork in the road. Everything that's on the top is for ASP.NET 4.6, meant for .NET 4.6 platform. And then ASP.NET 5 Preview is what runs on the .NET Core 5. And this is where you get to fork and choose how you want to support your applications. And this is Visual Studio running the same exact project template, MVC template. You'll notice the project structure here on the right-hand side is pretty much exactly the same as we saw with Yeoman. You get the startup files, you get the project JSON files, everything is JSON, and you get Grunt and Gulp integration. So I've talked for a bit. So these are all things new in ASP.NET and lots of new and exciting things. 2 things to keep in mind is we did a whole webinar on DevCraft a couple of weeks back, and all of the new things, we are right there with support for MVC 6 and VS 2015. So take a look at Telerik UI for ASP.NET Ajax for web forms, and then we have obviously the Telerik UI for ASP.NET MVC, which is for MVC wrappers, which render Kenda UI bits. So that's all from me with ASP.NET. I know I spoke a little fast. We're going to answer all your questions at the very end. But for now, let me hand it over to Michael.
Thank you, Sam. Yes, I am. Thank you very much, Sam. Let me go ahead and get this ready. So I am going to talk a tiny bit here about Visual Studio 2015 and C# and all things mobile. So with Visual Studio 2015, there's a couple of key features that I really enjoyed when I first installed it. So you can actually grab the release candidate right now. You can just search for Visual Studio 2015, and it'll pop up, and you'll be able to download it, and you'll be able to actually play with some of these features. So some of them that I have been looking at is this custom Windows layouts, IntelliSense for Power and NPM, and another one is debugging Lambdas. So let's go ahead and take a look at what those look like in Visual Studio. So beginning with custom window layouts, you can actually go to Window and then Apply Window Layout. And then you'll see there's a couple that I've already have listed here. That's because I've went ahead and created it. Obviously, you'd want to save the window layout first. But the reason that this feature stands out is that with custom window layouts, for whatever size screen that I'm going to be currently working with, I can quickly switch. So a lot of the times I'm switching between a large monitor, which is when I'm back at home, I've got two large monitors, and then I have a Surface device. So you can see I can use a keyboard combo Control-Alt-1 or Control-Alt-2 for my Surface device. So this is for my large monitor. Notice there's no toolbox, there's no toolbar. There's nothing actually showing as far as on the left or right-hand side, no project structure. Then if I go ahead and I show you the surface view, this is where I went ahead and applied the surface layout. Now the actual Solution Explorer and the toolbox is being shown. Another feature that I enjoyed that came from the previous Windows Universal projects was you being able to use shared projects. So now you can use shared projects all throughout the different types of apps. So in this sample, I'm simply just going to shared project, and you can just search for it. Once I create a shared project, you'll see that there is a shared project application that's right underneath the console application. So I've actually added a shared project, and then I've added a console application, a Windows Form application, and a WPF application. And all I've done is actually provided a reference to my shared project. So from here, I can actually use code that I wrote in the shared project throughout these various types of applications. And that's one of the things that I think that you'll find it's going to be a lot easier to start sharing code between projects. Another thing is IntelliSense for Bower and NPM. So you can see if you start up a brand new web application, you have a file here called bower.json. So and if I go into bower.json, you can think of this as a package manager, and I can start typing, and here I've actually started typing the word Angular. And when I started typing Angular, it's asking me which one that I would like to select. So here I would just actually pick 1.3.3, and then once I do that and I install the package, you can see that inside of this next screenshot, that inside of my Bower components, that Angular has been added. So Bower is now added to my Visual Studio project. Angular is now added to my Visual Studio project. So another feature here is Debug Lambdas. So in this example, I'm trying to find the index of the first odd element. So before we weren't able to debug Lambdas, and this is something that is just great. So you can see that inside of this list I have called elements, that I've got 4 items listed here. And down at the bottom of the screen, you'll see that it only found the odd elements when I put this break statement here. So you can see 0, 1, and 2 and the values for it. The key point to take away from this is that now you're going to be able to start debugging Lambdas. Next, we're going to move on to a couple of key features in C#6. So C#6 adds a vast variety of features that people have been talking about. Let's go ahead and just dive through some of those right now. So the first one that I wanted to show you is the static using syntax. So you can see I have on line number 4 a class, and then line number 5 I have a method. And then I have on line 8 just something called writeLine. So on line number 2 is where the magic is actually happening here. You can see we have using static system.console, and then on line number 8 we can just start using writeLine instead of doing it the old way, which was actually writing out console.writeLine. The next C# feature that I'd like to point out is Auto-Property Initializers. So again, we have our using statements to our system.console on line number 3, and then on line number 2, I'm actually adding in system.collections.generic. So I've created a customer class here that you can see, and in order to initialize this property, the old way we would create a constructor, and you can see that on line number 17. And inside the constructor, we have already kind of newed up this property here called customer ID, but we've had a couple of lines of code. Now we could actually, inside of that customer class, just simply use a public, just on line 22, a public GUID customer ID, and we've added our getter and setter, and then equals GUID.newGUID. So auto-property initializers is something that you'll probably take advantage of in your next project. Next up, we have dictionary initializers. So same customer class that we were working with before, and I have on line number 9, I just have a string where I've combined some of the items. But where you're really going to start to see the difference is when you take a look at starting around line number 16, which is the old kind of way that we were doing it. You'll notice that line 16 and line number 24 are actually identical. So what's changed? Well, look at where you actually see on line number 18, Michael Jordan, basketball, Peyton Manning, football. You can see where it was really easy to mess up as you were typing these through. Now you just put the brackets around the name and then equals and then basketball. So instead of having to form this, these crazy brackets and then make sure you have, everything aligned, now you can start assigning each element. Another sample here is selection exceptions in a try-catch block. So I just have an error that I have thrown intentionally on line number 8, and we can now use try-catch if. So when it catches if, it's going to look for the message, and obviously the one on line number 10 is not going to execute because the message is actually error. And then you can see on line number 14 where it is error, this one is actually going to be the one that executes. So this, again, is something that people have looked for in the past, and I'm glad that Microsoft has brought it to us. We also have async await added to error handling. So I've created basically a brand new task on line number 7. It's just called download async. And you can see that now I have a method called download async that's a public static async and download async. And then I have my try catch finally. So one thing to just keep a note here is that now you can actually use async and await in your error handling. So that's another added feature that people, I think, have been wanting for quite some time. Next is name of expressions. So in this sample on line number 5, I have something called do something, and it's going to just have blow up. And then I have a public static void do something that's passing in a string. In the old way, we had to do something that would be like, if name and then throw new exception, and you can see where we had to have quotes around the name. So the problem here was that if you didn't put the quotes around the name, sometimes people, or you maybe made a typo here on line number 12, that a lot of times people would make typos and they wouldn't be able to actually see, or wouldn't be able to know that. Now with the new way of doing this, you just use name of, and then you pass in name, which matches the string name that's coming in. So you kind of have some type safety there as you're actually entering in your code. So I made that mistake before. The last feature I'm going to show you is string interpolation. So here I went ahead, I've just declared 2 strings, a first name and last name. In the old method, you could see we either would use 1 or 2 of these ways. We would either just concatenate the string, may use the string dot format. The new way of doing this is just adding the $ and then name, and we could just simply use the brackets here for first name, space, and last name. So the new way is much easier to do this with. And everything that I showed you today, you can actually try this without installing Visual Studio 2015. You can just go to tryros1.azurewebsites.net. This is actually how I created these demos, was actually using this editor. So, so there's something that you can go ahead and you can try out. And the code for all of this will be available at the very end, so you can try these samples out. All right, let's go ahead and let's switch gears and let's talk about building mobile apps with Visual Studio. Okay, so we have three major platforms. Everybody knows Windows Phone, we have iOS, and we have Android. But we've also introduced some other things such as wearables. We now have Apple Watch, and then we also have the Moto 360 and the various Android Wear devices that are out there. So this leads us to several questions. I'm just going to kind of pop up some of these questions on the screen here where we can look at them. So everything coming from, what are my options for developing these apps? How can I develop for iOS, especially without a Mac? Because everybody, if you're a Visual Studio developer, you're always wondering, how can I get onto the iOS platform without using a Mac? Or I'm not really interested in learning Swift or Java or even Objective-C. And then how can I hit all three of these using Visual Studio? So let's talk about some of that. So we have several options. We're going to talk about mobile web, hybrid, native, and then cross-platform native apps, as I like to call them. Let's start with mobile web. Mobile web is probably the easiest, lowest barrier to entry. You can hit all of these platforms, and yes, even BlackBerry, for the 3 people that still use it. You're just using skill sets that you already have, HTML5, JavaScript, CSS. The cost is low because primarily your team probably already has some sort of web skills. And you can very good at reusing your user interface and core logic. And then finally, no approval from the App Store. Taking a look at some of the cons, though, is that you're going to have limited APIs, graphics, and also capabilities. You're going to be limited to just the capabilities of what the browser on the phone can actually do, and there's zero store discoverability, so nobody can actually jump to the App Store and look for your app. So how do you get started with the mobile web application? Well, you can fire up a brand new ASP.NET project. In this sample, I'm just going to select empty here, and I'm going to select OK down at the bottom. And once I do that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make sure, you look and make sure that Bootstrap is installed. Most of the time it will be if you're using the new templates, at least in Visual Studio 2013. And then we have an application. This is the application that we've seen over and over again. And if we start resizing our browser, you'll see the hamburger icon that I've got highlighted in red here. So our content with Bootstrap is already helping align our content to something that would fit on a smaller screen. So where does all of this magic happen, and how do you actually create these mobile optimized web pages? So in this application, I just actually created a new web form, and it was default, and I named it default.mobile.aspx. And you can see I have a head, and then I have the form, and then just for this simple demo, I've added in mobile browser for underneath my div tags. And if we look at that, we'll see here I've opened up Internet Explorer, and I've just switched to something like Windows Phone. And instead of calling that main page that we saw before that had the default template, now we just see the word mobile browser. And Telerik offers help for people that are looking to do mobile web apps. So Kendo UI Mobile, and obviously ASP.NET Ajax controls for the RAD page layout. Switching to hybrid apps. So the pros of hybrid apps is obviously hitting multiple platforms. You can use the same web skills that you already have, and also you can reuse your user interface and core logic. And you also have store discoverability. Some of the cons is performance, and I have a star by it because it can be debated. You do have native APIs, but they're obviously going to be provided by Cordova and plugins built by the community. And what I would say is kind of moderate type of graphics. And so going back to the performance part of it, it's depending upon a couple of different things. Obviously, the phone that you have, if you have older phones, some of the hybrid apps may not work as well. So we have a solution that you can check out. It's called Telerik AppBuilder, and here this is inside of Visual Studio. So I've just went to my templates, and I went to Telerik, and I went to AppBuilder, and I can go ahead and I can select a project. So we already have like a Kendo UI that's baked into some of these projects, or you can just use plain vanilla Cordova. So I've got a blank, and then I've got the drawer, which kind of gives you the side drawer that we have been used to, and then also the tab strip. And this is what the app actually looks like. So you can see we have app resources for all three platforms. Kendo's been added to this as well. And then we have views of our 3 pages. So right off the bat, we already have an app, and here's what it looks like. So here is the application I selected from the template. And I'm using the built-in simulator that's provided inside of Visual Studio to show you what it looks like. So you can see that we're at the home page, and then when I click it, we have our other settings that you can select. Now switching over to native apps. Native apps, you really have access to everything. All the native APIs, the graphics are great for gaming, along with the speed. Again, App Store distribution, you can find those apps. Most of the cons I would narrow down to, a single platform, and the development cost is going to be high. If you're developing a Swift app, if you're developing an iOS app and you're wanting to use the latest version of Swift 1.2, then obviously you're going to run into several people that have not used that before. And they're going to be expensive. So obviously with Microsoft, you use XAML, C#, iOS, Swift, Objective-C, and Android, you're using Java. And then there's also cross-platform native apps. This is what we've heard a lot about. So you write it in one language, and it just runs across all of the different platforms. So kicking off things with Xamarin, Xamarin is one of the solutions that I have used, and you're able to have just this one C# project, and you're able to hit all the platforms. So with Xamarin, this is native apps with Xamarin iOS. You can see that there is blank apps. There's also some of the metal games, which is something that people that are writing games and that is there. There's templates available for that in Visual Studio. And there's also, if you can see underneath iOS, you can see Apple Watch, where you can actually develop Apple Watch apps. And then there's Android. Android's the same sort of thing, but you'll notice there's also a Wear app that's available there inside of the templates as well. And this is what it looks like once you actually load up one. So I've just actually went in and created one called Xamarin, an Android application in Xamarin. And everything's familiar to you. You still have the powerful IDE that you've had in the past. Normally when working with Android, you would be in something like Android Studio, but with Xamarin, you can obviously stay in your favorite IDE. So we do have quite a bit of components that are available for Xamarin. Xamarin.Forms, we've added chart, list view, and calendar, and then we also have wrappers available for Xamarin.iOS and Xamarin.Android. More information for that obviously can be found on our site. And we also have our very own solution, which is NativeScript. And NativeScript allows you to build these same cross-platform native applications using XML for your UI and using JavaScript for your core business logic. And you can style it with, obviously, CSS. And you can find out more about that at just nativescript.org. Okay, so I am wrapping up here. So at the end of the day, I think it boils down to what are you actually trying to accomplish here? This is something that your team needs to really, sit down and just talk about. For the high-performing applications, if you're deciding that you're going to write a game, then obviously you may need to look at the native application. Do you just need maybe, you know, a restaurant app, so to speak? You know, hey, here's where my app is, here's where my store is, you know, how can I find that? That's where, you know, a hybrid application, you know, may work out very well. Or if you need just some simple web page with maybe just some information, you could just look at just mobile web there. And obviously, if you need store discoverability. But discussing these with your team, you can actually choose the right technology. I have here, you know, if you have a very strong C# skill set, then that can be reused with Xamarin. But if your team is very strong on the web side of things, that's where you're going to probably take a look at NativeScript. And I think that's just about it. So the source code for everything that I've talked about here is that can actually just be found on my GitHub account, just github.com/mbcrump/new.net. And this will be available later on if you don't get it now. And I'm going to hand things over to Sam.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I think you can. Okay. That was incredible, Mike. You talked for like 20, 25 minutes without a single fumble and no sip of water. That's really awesome. Let me see if I can follow it up. All right. So we're in the last stretch, maybe the last 15 minutes or so. I want to show you just a couple of quick things and maybe just a really quick demo of how your data can live with the modern cloud. So let's talk a little bit about the cloud. So hopefully I don't need to sell you on why the cloud is important. We have an array of devices in our lives and we switch platforms between iOS, Windows, and Android all day long. And we want our experiences to continue as we move from device to device. So how else are you going to do it if you do not leverage something that is outside of the devices? So we obviously get why the cloud is important, but the problem is, well, this guy. Everyone seems to be talking about the cloud, and they're saying do everything on the cloud, bring all your applications to the cloud, and the little voice inside of your head goes like, wait, I have enterprise data, I have things that I cannot just move to the cloud. So maybe there is a middle ground. So let's talk about cloud computing of offerings and what these mean for you. So as we go across the spectrum, you see SaaS, PaaS, and IaaS. So SaaS is software as a service. Every time you open up Facebook or Gmail, you are actually using software as a service, which is entirely hosted by somebody else. You're just using the software. PaaS is platform as a service, where you do host your applications on a certain cloud platform, and then you maintain your applications. And then on the far side is IaaS, which is infrastructure as a service, which is more like a VM. They give you a container, you run the OS and your applications, and you get lots of control over it. So as we go from left to right, you have more control, but at the same time, more responsibility. So my vote always is to look for what exactly your needs are in terms of going to the cloud, and try to pick something that you absolutely need, and always compare providers. Make sure in terms of pricing and features, you are picking something that is that's good for your application and your team. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about something called BaaS. It's a new sort of cloud, and it's not the fish, not the guitar. It is actually Backend as a service, and this is something that has become rather popular in the last 3 or 4 years. And I think as the new .NET developers, we can leverage a lot of BaaS benefits. So here's what you get out of most standard BaaS providers. You get an easy cloud and backend for your apps. And by apps, I don't just mean mobile apps. It could be desktop and web as well. But you get a centralized place where you can host your data and control your services. You can reach almost every user on any platform, be it iOS, Android, and Windows. Push notifications is a very, very enticing way of keeping your users engaged, but as we all know, it's actually difficult to do on every platform because every Microsoft, Apple, and Google, they all do things a little differently. So wouldn't it be nice if you could just do a cross-platform push notification, which is platform agnostic, and you have one way of coding it up? You obviously get social user authentication, which is you do not need to always have forms authentication where you log the users in. It's risky to hang on to somebody's credentials. Let the other guys do it, the Microsofts, the Facebooks, and the Twitters. Let them do the authentication. You just handle tokens, which is much more easier. And your app, your cloud services get scalability, which is elastic, so you can control how much and how little you need based on seasonal changes and so on. And obviously you get RESTful, which is an architectural way of doing things, of doing over HTTP and restlessness, and I guess I should say restfulness, and doing things which are very stateless and so on, so it can be consumed from the app and any platform. So you get all of these benefits from just about any BaaS provider, and I want to highlight two of them. First is the Azure App Service, mobile apps in particular. This used to be called the Azure Mobile Services before. It's just called mobile apps now, but it's essentially the same thing. You get all of those benefits of hosting your data, using user authentication, cross-platform push notifications, and scaling out, and all of that features. And that's actually a very solid service for iOS, Android, and Windows developers as well. So take a look at what Azure has to offer for you. I think Azure Mobile Apps is a really convincing service for just about any mobile developer nowadays. Now, along the lines is Telerik Backend Services. And on paper, these look very similar. It looks similar to Azure Mobile Services, but I like this for some specific things that it does really well. In particular, the push notifications being really cross-platform and just a single way to send out a push notification to Apple, iOS, Android, and Windows Phone. At the same time, things like email flows, so if people forget their passwords and just registering somebody in. Things about how you connect to files and data that you host, like a blob storage. Those things I feel are a little more easier. And the big benefit you get is integration with just about any other Telerik product that you're using, be it Kendo UI, be it Sitefinity, be it ASP.NET, and all of the mobile offerings. You get first-class integration to access and use Telerik backend services. And here's the URL where you can go get started. Now, as we walk through this, excuse me, guys. So the problem that you guys might be facing is on-premises data. A lot of us deal with huge amounts of enterprise data which is on-premises. It's living in your SQL Server or Oracle or some other place. So every time somebody says cloud and move all of your stuff to the cloud, you go, no, I can't do that, and you have legitimate concerns. So let's talk about how you can get around that on-premises data. I mean, you should not always have to build a whole service layer, which you can, and maintain that, but that's just a heavy overload. You simply want your SQL Server data to be available for consumption from iOS, Android, or any modern mobile platform. So you really want to free your data and have access to it everywhere, at the same time keeping it secure. So this is where something we have, it's called data connectors, and this might be something that's really helpful, especially for your enterprise data needs. What this is just a thin layer inside of Telerik backend services that helps you connect to on-premises data, be it Microsoft. Excuse me, guys. See, Michael was better at this than me, talking nonstop, but I'll try to do my best. So data connectors is something that helps you connect to Microsoft SQL Server, MySQL, Oracle, or Postgres SQL. So anytime you have an on-premises SQL store, you should be able to just connect to it, have all of your data behind your firewall, behind your on-premises data store, but have access to it and be able to do CRUD operations on your data. So let's take a look at how this actually works. So what I have here is SQL Server, and this is the world that many of us live in day to day. You'll notice that I am running SQL Server on a machine called Telerik VM. That's just my virtual machine, and I have the Notwin database installed. I'm looking at the employees table, and I have maybe 9 or 10 records in the employee table. This is my world. This is my enterprise on-premises data. How do I have access to this outside of just SQL Server? Turns out I can do a couple of things. First is if I head to platform.telerik.com, and I mean there's a free trial, you can give this a try anytime, I can create a backend services project. Once I create a project, I get an interface like this, and on the left-hand side you'll notice there's a data connectors link. If I click on that, I can begin creating a new data connector. And the way I do it is through something called the data link server. So obviously this is magic. There has to be something, a bridge between your data and Telerik backend. So data link server is just a very, very thin web API project that you need to just install and run on IIS. You'll notice that in this screen itself, there are download and installation instructions. So you just download that, run it on IIS, and you're good to go. You will not have to touch this project unless you really want to look inside, but it's just a black box that you can just let go on its own. You notice that on my IIS manager, I have the data link server running, and I have it running locally, so I can talk to my SQL server from my local installation of Data Link server. Once I have it running, things get much, much easier. You'll notice that this is where I'm setting up a new data connector. I give it a name like Northwind Data Connector. I say what type of database I'm trying to connect to, that's SQL Server. And then I choose the Data Link server URL. In this case, since I have it running locally, I'm just using an ngrok URL, which points to my local host or port 80. If you have your server already installed, you just give it the production URL. That's all it needs. And then beyond that, it's just a connection string. Notice how it's pointing to that same server, the database being Northwind, and integrated security is true. So it's actually getting in as a Windows authenticated user through that Web API project. Once you do that, you will see magical things happening. First is if I go into type, a type is just like a table. So notice I can create a type from a data connector, so it can actually reflect on all of the tables that I have in my SQL server and give me a list of all those tables, and I can create a type from any of those tables. And also I can choose a subset of my columns and all the fields in my table as my type. So maybe my employee table has 20 different columns. I just wanted 5 of these columns to be actually exposed out as data service. So I can choose that mapping layer very easily. Once I've done that, you'll notice that when I go into the employee's type, and this is where I'm back on my backend services, I'm just looking at my browser right now. My SQL server is off on one side. Once I pull up the employee's type or the table, you'll notice that it pulls up all of the data that's in that table. This is magical. And keep in mind, this is not being hosted on Telerik backend services. This is directly coming from your SQL server straight out through that bridge of the Web API project. So I get full CRUD access to this data. I can read, I can write, I can edit, except we are not hosting any of this data. It's all going back through the funnel into your database. So this is just a quick way of getting access to your SQL server without having to write a whole Web API and a web services layer. And even better is every backend services has an API project. And if I go to the next slide, you'll notice that if I go to api.everlive, which is like an internal namespace, and then I enter my unique API key and go to the employee's entity name, I get pure JSON back. This is flat out JSON data coming straight out of my SQL database without me having to do anything. And once I have data in JSON format, I can consume that from any place, right? This is a full-on Web API or RESTful endpoint. It's just being funneled through the Web API project, which you don't have to care about. So really quick and easy way of exposing your SQL data out as JSON. And once you do that, you can access this from your iOS or your Android or your Windows Phone app. You can consume this from just about anywhere. So essentially what I'm trying to say is just because you have lots and lots of on-premises data, don't feel like that's just holding you back to use the modern cloud and all of the mobile stuff. Utilize things like, I think Azure has something called hybrid connections, which is a little different offering, but the same idea. You can connect to a SQL Server installation from an ASP.NET application that's running on the cloud. So look at some of these options and take a look at what the cloud can do for you. I think even if you have lots and lots of enterprise data, you can make that available very easily and expose that out so it can be consumed from any of the modern mobile applications and even like web or desktop. So I think that's all that I wanted to cover. So once again, let us go into a Q&A mode. Again, like I said, Michael, Ed, and me are going to be live. All three of us trying to answer as many questions as we can. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us. I know it's been a lot of things we covered, but hopefully it gives you a nice overview of all the things that are changing in .NET and how you need to change, or maybe even not change, but look at how to leverage the new .NET framework just a little better for your applications. All right, so I'm going to stop here and give us maybe 30 seconds so we can have Ed and Michael join us online. You guys on?
I am here,
Sam.
All right. Hey, welcome, Ed. I know you've been trying to answer a lot of questions online. Michael, you here as well?
I am here.
Okay. Ed, since Michael and me maybe need a break, why don't you start us off?
All right, Sam. So I'll take the first question while Sam and Michael catch their breath. They've been talking a long time. One question that we got actually asked several times is about WebForms. The question is WebForms dead? What's its future? Will there eventually be a version for .NET 5? So currently .NET WebForms is supported for ASP.NET 4.6. There is no current roadmap that shows WebForms being supported on .NET 5 or .NET 5 Core. Now, I would not call WebForms dead by any means. It's still being updated. The 4.6 release has some updates. And it could eventually come to .NET 5. However, I would not anticipate it coming to .NET Core 5 because of the dependencies that WebForms has on system web. Let's see, I've got another question. Which new C# features require ASP.NET 4.6 or 5.0? All of the language features that we saw in the beginning of the presentation should be available in 4.6 and also 5.0.
All right.
And then,
do you want to go on?
Yeah, do you want to take a question, Michael? Or Sam?
Yeah, I can take one. All right, so we got some interesting questions on .NET Core and the integrations with Docker and Node.js. Maybe I'll let Ed take the Node.js one. So Docker, let's talk about that. So Docker is a sandboxed application container which runs on Linux, and it has gained a lot of traction of late because it's just really nicely packaged and helps you deploy just about any app that you can have it running on a Linux server. So absolutely, you can run ASP.NET 5 on Docker containers. I think there is an image which used to be a preview. I have to check, but I think it's almost signed off now. So there is actually an ASP.NET 5 Docker image which has all of the .NET Core pieces already built in. You just have to add your application to that container, and then just host it. So your ASP.NET 5 applications can run very nicely on Docker and be able to serve up ASP.NET web pages and any web API stuff from inside Docker. So moving on, let's take one more here. I think we get this quite a lot. Will Telerik controls in Q3 release support .NET Core 5 beta? Yes and no. I cannot give you a definitive answer, and I definitely cannot give you a date. What I can tell you is right now, especially when it comes to UI for ASP.NET Ajax or MVC, all of our bits that we released in Q2, they already have support for VS 2015, and we have support for MVC 6. Granted, you run it on the full .NET framework for now. All I can tell you is we are looking very, very actively. Keep in mind, I mean, .NET Core is still in beta, so we cannot say we have support unless Microsoft comes out with our RTM bits. So we are very actively looking at it, and we completely envision that in future we will have support for .NET Core 5. But I cannot give you a date right now. How about Michael?
Hey, okay, let me go ahead and take a question. Let me go ahead and grab this one. Is the current version of UI for WPF compatible with the new Visual Studio 2015? Or does it require a future update from Telerik? So as I've been playing with Visual Studio 2015, I actually went ahead and installed it. And so you can go ahead and install it and use it without a future update from Telerik. The bits that are out now work with Visual Studio 2015. So go ahead and grab it and check it out.
I can take one more. Or Michael, you want to go on?
Yeah, I can go on. So another question here is, what is the impact to the shared project if code changes in that project and it's been shared across many applications? So one of the things, whenever you create that shared project, all of the other applications are obviously dependent upon it because it's a reference. You know, it's just simply a reference that you add to each of those projects. So if you make changes to the shared project, then you're obviously going to need to do a build all to rebuild all of the different projects, such as your console application, your Windows Forms application, WPF, ASP.NET, etc. So just keep that in mind. If you make any changes to that shared project, you will need to recompile. Think of it as just a DLL, for example, that you've added. In order to reuse some new updated code from that, you're going to have to recompile your projects.
I'll pass it back over to you, Sam.
Okay. All right, I got a couple of classic ones. So the Telerik backend services thing is obviously very enticing. So someone asked, is Telerik backend data connectors secure? That's a great question. And yes, you absolutely have to think about security. So yes, it absolutely is. Everything is over HTTPS. So you get to set up your certificate, and any communication between the Telerik backend services and the web API project, the data link server that you host, that's all encrypted, so no one can read that. In addition, there is an authentication key, which is like a specific GUID that you can exchange between the Telerik backend services and the data connector. So that's like a little exchange that happens, and any other application which does not have access to it will not be able to have even read access to your data. So it's absolutely secure. But more importantly, if you have any concerns, and keep in mind, we are not hosting any of your data, it's just a bridge into your SQL server or your relational database server. But if you have any concerns, you keep in mind that you do not have to go to the public platform.telerik.com, the platform installation publicly. You actually host Telerik backend services entirely in-house, inside of your premises, and then you're simply using our RESTful services to hook up your data to be exposed. So just keep that in mind. It is secure by default with this architecture, but you can make it more secure by hosting it yourself if you wanted to. One more question. I think there were a couple of questions around this, so let me try answering this. So what's the story with OData and ASP.NET 5, or what's happening with Web API? So I will honestly say that I haven't played with exactly the OData bits in ASP.NET 5, but Web API and MVC is seeing a merger. So if you go back to the history, I mean, these two things started from very different backgrounds. MVC was always meant to serve up like views and controllers, and those views serving up HTML. While Web API came along, they had slightly different namespaces, and they served up data. Well, they were similar, and a lot of us ended up repeating a lot of code. So now with MVC 6, these things are actually merged together. So you can simply have an action result be either an MVC controller or a Web API endpoint by simply switching up, like there's I'm forgetting the term here, like there is an attribute that you put on top of your method that simply says what you are, whether you want to spit back data or whether you want to spit back HTML. So you get to control that very, very easily. There are a couple of enhancements to Web API in terms of asynchronous access, especially if you're using Entity Framework. In terms of OData, I haven't seen anything that says it will not be supported, and I mean it's pretty unheard of to think that when ASP.NET 5 goes live and OData will not be supported, because right now OData is just a NuGet package. I mean, it is no different from just a Web API endpoint. You just get one more NuGet package that gives you some bells and whistles on top of your Web API endpoint. You get to support some of the OData features, and I completely assume that once ASP.NET 5 is ready to ship, you will have full support for OData just as any other Web API endpoint. All right, Ed, you got some more?
Yeah, I'll take one, Sam. One of the questions was regarding .NET Core, and the question is there no .NET Core support for cross-platform native applications? Currently, .NET Core 5 is only supported cross-platform for ASP.NET web applications. So you're not going to be able to develop Windows desktop application in .NET Core that runs across OS X or OS X and other platforms. Michael, you want to take a question?
Absolutely. So I want to jump into a couple of questions that I've seen here. One was kind of a tie into another one. So it was, okay, if you're using Visual Studio 2015, and you're using Xamarin or Telerik AppBuilder, do you need an Apple device to actually compile the iOS apps? So if you've been on any of the DevTools webinars where I've been showcasing Xamarin, you will note that I have had to have a Mac as my build host. Typically in those webinars, I would VNC into my Mac, and you could actually see it building there because it uses Xcode, which is the IDE that developers use for iOS, to write iOS apps. So yes, with Xamarin, you absolutely need a Mac in order to compile the apps. With Telerik AppBuilder, you do not need a Mac in order to compile the apps. There is an option that will let you build the application in the cloud. And I know cloud's kind of the dirty word, but you do not have to do that. It will produce your IPA file, your iPhone application is what that stands for, IPA. It will produce your IPA file, and then you can submit that either using one of our tools inside of the Telerik platform to the App Store. So I hope that clears that up, at least with Xamarin and with Telerik AppBuilder. Another question I'll just go ahead and grab for Xamarin, because I think this one's kind of an important one, is, hey, I'm a professional .NET developer and an Android user with a severe vision disability. What options under Xamarin are available for developing apps with robust text-to-speech and speech-to-text? So I actually wrote an application in Java that used the speech recognizer class, and this app basically you tell it what the prices of a meal, and it will calculate a tip. So all of this can be found inside of a class called the speech recognizer class. And you can just do a search for it. You can even look at my post if you would like to. It's just called Build Your First Singleware App. And everything that's included in the Android SDK, you can use that in your Xamarin application. So just keep that in mind. Android M, just came out, so there is some support for that, but just play it on the safe side if you at least go to 4.4, which is Lollipop. And earlier, any of those, and by the way, the speech recognizer class, I haven't looked at it, I can't find it right off the bat, but it uses, well actually here it is, it actually was added in API level 8, and so just don't worry about that. If you're wanting to use speech to text or text to speech or speech to text, just look and make sure that it's already available on the Android API and it translates over to Xamarin where you can write that same code in C#. And I think I'll just pass it back over to I think Sam.
Yeah, I can take some. All right, so let me answer maybe a couple of questions on Telerik backend services and especially the data connector stuff, because it's enticing. It's very easy to have access to your on-premises data that way. So someone asked if the IIS server, does that need to be published out to the internet, or can that be in-house? So if you are installing the data link server, which is that thin web API project, and it's sort of the bridge between Telerik backend services and your data, then the IIS server, the URL of your web API project needs to be accessible out on the internet. So, Telerik backend services is out on the cloud, so it needs a way to talk to your service, right? So that's how it's going to get into your database. So that needs to be out on the internet so that we can talk to it. And again, keep in mind it can be as secure as you want, HTTPS with any custom certificates and authentication key and so on. But if you really want to host backend services on your inside of your premises, then no, then that does not need to be out on the internet because you're doing everything in-house. Then the only thing that will be out is the actual REST endpoint for your data, which you can consume from any platform. Another question we got was, does Telerik backend services expose any ORMs, which is the object relational mapping, things like Entity Framework and so on? So yes and no, because it's not apples to apples here. So we do have a whole ORM offering with a product called Open Access, but backend services has a lot of that stuff actually built in. So backend services is meant to host your data, have access to like cross-platform push notifications and RESTful services on top of the data and so on. So a lot of the ORM stuff that you're looking for is actually built into the backend services. And what you get is SDKs for any platform that you're building applications for, be it for web, be it for iOS, Android, or anything Windows or .NET. Each of those SDKs have nice wrappers, so you can actually do CRUD operations on your data, which is hosted in backend services through these simple SDKs. And the last thing, maybe just to switch gears here, one question we got was, does Bower have a benefit over NuGet? And maybe I'll let Ed weigh in on this, because since he's our web resident expert. My 2 cents are, it's not really a benefit or thing, it's just two parallel things. I mean, NuGet is very, very popular if you're a Visual Studio developer. That's how you can get a lot of your third-party libraries and your DLLs. I don't think Bower is, quite as popular as NuGet in terms of Visual Studio developers, but Bower is very popular with the JavaScript guys, especially if you're doing pure web. In terms of pure JavaScript libraries, I think you might find Bower have a little bit more, but then again, NuGet has a lot more in terms of .NET. So, Ed, you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, you came pretty close there. The benefits of Bower are going to be more front-end, I think. Front-end JavaScript or CSS frameworks are going to be more plentiful on Bower, and possibly the installation process might go a little bit smoother. However, with NuGet, you may find things that are more tailored towards setting up those CSS frameworks or JavaScript frameworks specifically for the ASP.NET MVC platform. So there's a little more specialization with NuGet for MVC projects, and then a little more general web specialization with Bower.
All right, guys.
I'll go ahead and
any more?
I'll go ahead and grab this. How does .NET 5 Core integrate with Node.js question? To piggyback off the last Bower question. As far as Node.js, if you're creating a Node.js application, there's not going to be a lot of support with .NET 5 Core. However, Visual Studio does support Node.js templating and things like that. And also, you're able to run NPM and grab packages for your projects to run things like maybe SAS or less compilation and things like that in the background, things that don't necessarily go into the end application that you deliver. And then another question is about compatibility in Visual Studio. If I open a 2013 project in 2015, will it migrate? Is it compatible? Yes, you can open Visual Studio 2013 projects in Visual Studio 2015. You can also have both of those Visual Studio editions installed on the same machine. So 2013 and 2015 do install side by side and play pretty well together. As far as stuff being backwards compatible, if you create a new project in 2015, depending on the template you choose, you may be able to open it in 2013. If you choose something like a brand new MVC 6 project template and try to open that in an older version of Visual Studio, you're definitely going to have some issues. Michael, do you have any more questions you'd like to take?
Yeah, I'll take like 2 more, and I think we'll hand it over to Sam to wrap it up. So 2 of the questions that I've seen that actually have appeared multiple times, one of them is about Telerik's offering for Xamarin.forms. So I did have a slide that was in the deck, but you can actually just go out to Telerik.com and you can navigate and you can find UI for, you can add UI for Xamarin. So, you can go to UI for Xamarin, and you can see that we have 3 controls available for Xamarin.forms and many others for the Xamarin wrappers. One more that I saw that had came through a couple of times was, can Visual Studio 2015 convert Android APKs to apps that run on Windows 10? And other questions about just using Android in general. So it hasn't been released yet, but Microsoft is going to allow people that have written Android applications to port that code over and to use that inside of Visual Studio 2015 to make apps that run on Windows 10. That hasn't been released yet. You can sign up for some of the previews and be a so-called insider. You'll just have to do a quick search on that, and it will pull up. And that's pretty much all that I have. I'm going to hand it over to Sam to wrap things up.
All right. Yeah, I think that covers most of the questions that Ed had lined up for us. Once again, we tried covering a lot in this hour, and our goal was to give you as much of a broad overview of everything that's changing in .NET for you guys. It is an exciting time. I think it's one of the best times to be a .NET developer, especially if you're in ASP.NET and mobile. So hopefully this was helpful and fun. And thank you so much again for joining us from all over the world, and we will see you around probably in the next DevCraft webinar. So thank you so much for your time, and have a good day.